Howdy, this is Karen from KarenDawn Designs, and today I'm going to teach you my preferred method for the tubular bind-off. To work on a tubular bind-off, you need to have a 1x1 ribbing. So this example is a 2x2 ribbing. So the first thing that we need to do is convert the 2x2 ribbing to a 1x1 ribbing. If you know how to cable without a cable needle, that skill can be really handy for this. If not, that's okay, but it will help you actually in cabling without a cable needle. So the first thing you want to do is knit the first stitch. And then this knit stitch we need to change to a purl stitch, and this purl stitch we need to change to a knit stitch. Instead of just knitting, just purling and then knitting, we're actually going to swap these two stitches out. So the easiest way to do that is to bring your yarn around to the front so that way you're ready to make a purl stitch next. Then take your right needle and insert it through the back loop of the second stitch on your left needle. Then hold your thumb right underneath that first stitch. So when you do this, pull the left needle out of those two stitches, it keeps that stitch from falling. So when you pull your stitches off the left needle, you'll have that one stitch, which was the second stitch, on your right needle, and then a loose stitch. You want to grab that loose stitch with your left needle and then put this stitch on your right needle back to your left needle. So you've just swapped those two stitches out. And I'll show you that again in just a minute. So now we've swapped those stitches and we can purl this stitch. Then knit this stitch. And the next stitch you'll notice is a purl. So it is fine to just purl it without doing anything extra. And then the next stitch is a knit, so we're good. And next we need a purl, but we've come across a knit stitch. So again, we need to swap this knit stitch with this purl stitch. So put your yarn in front so you're ready for a purl. Bring your right hand needle through the back loop on the second stitch on your left needle. Put your thumb here to grip this stitch that is about to become loose. Slide those two stitches off your left needle. One of them is still on your right needle. One of them is loose. Grab the loose stitch and then put that stitch from your right needle back to your left needle. Then you can purl, knit, purl because the next stitch is a purl, knit, and then we're back to the same situation where we need to make a purl stitch and this is a knit stitch. So just to show you one more time, yarn in front, ready to purl, insert the right needle through the back stitch, grip, slide off, grab that loose stitch, return that stitch, and now you can purl and knit. And go ahead and do that all the way across the rest of the row, and then we'll be ready to do the next step. So now you have a 1x1 rib. So you can see our knit, purl, knit, purl. The next thing you need to do is cut your yarn and thread it onto a tapestry needle. How much yarn to leave? Usually what you want to do is take the width of your piece on the needle and measure out about 4 times the length. So if you just lay your yarn over 1, 2, 3, 4, so you kind of have 4 going back and forth, then that should be long enough. I usually always add a little bit extra just so I don't run out. Then thread it onto a tapestry needle. So the first 2 stitches are just setup stitches. So first thing you do is take your tapestry needle and thread it purlwise through the first stitch on the needle, leave it on the needle, and then knitwise through the next stitch on the needle. And again, leave that on the needle. So that's just a little bit of setup. And now we're going to do the actual bind off rhythm that we're going to get into. So take your tapestry needle, insert it knitwise through that first stitch, and take that first stitch off the needle. Pull your yarn through. Then insert your stitch purlwise through the second needle or second stitch on your needle. Right there. And pull your yarn through. Then you want to take your tapestry needle purlwise through that first stitch on your needle and take it off the needle and pull your yarn through. Then you take your tapestry needle and instead of inserting it through a stitch, you actually insert it between two stitches. So between the first and second stitch on your needle. So coming in from the back to the front, between those two stitches. And pull the yarn through. And then insert the second stitch, insert your needle knitwise through that, and pull the yarn through. And those are the steps that you'll repeat across the row. So let me show you again. Tapestry needle knitwise through the first stitch, drop the stitch off the needle, pull your yarn through. Now the second stitch on the needle, insert purlwise and pull the yarn through. Then go purlwise through the first stitch on the needle. Remove it and pull your yarn through. And my yarn is a little longer than it really needs to be. Then don't go through a stitch, go between the two stitches. So from the back to the front, between those two stitches, and pull your yarn through. And then on the second stitch, insert your needle knitwise. Now make sure on this second stitch when you're inserting knitwise that you're not going through that first stitch on the needle. You are just going through that second stitch. So you're actually going through the stitch and then out the back, you're not going through any other stitches. So let me show you one more time. First stitch, knitwise, take it off the needle. Pull your yarn through. Second stitch on the needle, purlwise, pull your yarn through. Now the first stitch on the needle purlwise, and this time remove that one. Pull your yarn through. Then the rather strange going from the back to the front between the two stitches. Pull the yarn through. And then second stitch, go knitwise just through that stitch and pull your yarn through. And do that until you get to the last couple of stitches. When you come to the last two stitches, you won't have enough stitches left to do the entire pattern. So just insert your needle knitwise through this stitch, slip it off, and then insert your needle purlwise through this stitch and slip it off. And pull your needle or your yarn through both of those stitches, and then you can weave in this end. Here's an extra trick for making the movements a little more smoothly. So the first two steps are to insert this knitwise, slip the stitch off, and then what would become the second stitch on the needle, you go purlwise. So you can do those in one motion. So you slip this one knitwise, slip it off, and then before you start pulling the yarn through, go into that second stitch on the needle purlwise, and then pull the yarn through. And that just basically is condensing those two motions into one. Now steps 3 and 4. You'll be taking this first stitch off purlwise and then going through the 2 stitches left on the needle in between. So again, you can do those in one movement. So go through this stitch purlwise, take it off the needle, and then go around to the back and insert your needle from back to front between those 2 stitches, and then pull your yarn through. Then you can do the final step, inserting the needle through that stitch knitwise and pulling it through. So here is my tubular bind off. You can see the ribbing is not flaring out. It looks nice and neat, but it also stretches. So your ribbing is not going to be too tight. So not too loose, not too tight. It's a rather perfect bind off for ribbing either 1x1 or 2x2. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions, you can contact me on Ravelry. I am KarenDawn, or my website is KarenDawnDesigns.com. Thanks and happy knitting.